Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with CreativeMind. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we are going to do a deep dive into shadow work today, which is everyone's favorite. And we're specifically talking about shadow work in family relationships, shadow work with parent-child, marital and even romantic partnerships, and then sibling rivalry. So
juicy stuff.
Yeah. You ready, Rob, for this?
I'm ready.
So before we begin, I do want to remind you that it really helps us a lot to get more viewers to our podcast and listeners to subscribe to our podcast. So go to whatever podcast service you use, click on subscribe, and make sure you get every episode because we're going to continue this conversation next week. You don't want to miss it. So let's start off with those of you who are new listening to our show, maybe not be so familiar with Jung or are familiar with Jung. Let's just talk a little bit about what is the shadow. There's so much misinformation about shadow work, and we're just going to talk about our...
Yeah, and I would say more how we define it and how we use it. Because there are many different interpretations. Mm-hmm. But the way we see it, because we're approaching it from a non-broken, non-clinical approach. Mm-hmm. So the way we see it, the shadow is simply what we deny about our personality, about our persona, as Jung says. What we deny about our persona, it's done instinctually, of course. We don't, sit down one day and say, I don't like this about myself, so I'm going to repress it. It comes about as we react to the environment that we're growing up in, meaning our culture, our family life, our society. We find ways to fit in, to adjust, and we build this persona that fits that environment. But in the process, we have to repress, deny, push aside a lot of things that come natural to us and that we want to express.
Like our true nature, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't fit the environment that we're in. And guess which one is going to win out? Of course, fitting in and getting along in our environment.
So early in life, we have this ego, this sense of I that's really trying to protect us. And so the persona is a mask that we put out in the world basically as a defense to interact with the world. So people really don't know who we really are. We always show our mask in relationships specifically. But then as we grow up, we sort of fall into this trap of thinking that's who we are. Our whole identity is created on this mask. We do personality tests on this mask. We define ourselves with our degrees and our marital status and how much money we make, our credit score, all is this mask. And so it really isn't who we are, but we forget that there's this other part of ourselves it's almost like the forgotten parts of our personality, and also emotionally, like emotional energy that we don't express. So for example, anger, we don't rage all the time, most of us, so we suppress that. And so that's one of the big aspects. And the shadow is basically an unconscious container, basically like a storage room where we put all our personality traits that are not adaptable to society or that we think are not adaptable, and we kind of store it away, but it doesn't go anywhere, and it becomes this untapped energy and really limits our life.
Yeah, and it's not limiting beliefs. It's essentially content that, again, like you said, doesn't fit into our current environment or our past environments. And so there's a lot of good stuff there that's that we miss out on because, as you'll see, in talking about these relationships, especially in the family, you'll see what we suppress that we need to bring forth. We need to become conscious of.
And the thing is that it has a bad rap, the shadow, like it's our dark side. But actually, the ego is the only one that's judging it as bad, because it's like we can't say what we really feel. I mean, how many times have you been in a long line and someone cuts, and your instinct to say, you just want to shake that person to say, what are you doing? You're cutting in line. But no, you're nice, or maybe a passive aggressive in a way, but you never really like let it out because it's just not appropriate, right? We're social creatures. We want to fit in. And but that urge, right? We suppress it all the time. Yeah. And so a great example of the persona shadow, just a kind of a very simple one, is we all want to be liked. We all want to be like seen as a good person. So anything that is about our personality that would be unlikable or people would judge as bad, we suppress. And like an angry person, we don't want to be seen as an angry person, so we suppress it. Now, the opposite of that would be maybe someone uses anger as power. So someone being angry all the time as their persona hides the sensitive, soft, kind side because they see kindness as weakness. So it can go both ways. So it really is your environment, your culture, religion, all these family, generational patterns that are passed down all the time through life and generations that cause these kind of psychological conflicts within ourselves.
And speaking about family,
yes,
we always tell our students, if you run out of triggers to work on, go visit your family.
Yeah.
And there you go. All these triggers will come up. So we're going to talk about the relationship between a parent and a child, the marital relationship, and sibling rivalry relationships.
My favorite. So parent-child relationships. Now, Robbie, you did lots of work, clinical work with families and young children. You were a child psychologist. So this is your road.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of this kind of projection going on between parent and child. So one example is simply like this. If the parent, because of the demands of making a family or creating a family, they have to repress their creative, rebellious side, right? You can't be a rebel, be riding motorcycles and going off to concerts if you have a family, so you have to repress that. As their kids grow up and then exhibit those rebellious attitudes, it triggers them. Right?
Because they feel almost, but it's not conscious. They're like, they want to maybe control that child and put harder rules on them because because of the way they develop their persona, it's dangerous, right? There's a lot of fear around showing that side.
Yes. And of course, it's projected onto the child. That rebellious attitude, which they recognize, but maybe not consciously, but their unconscious recognizes that this is bad or this is something I have to repress. Then it shows up as over-controlling. The parent becomes very controlling. They want to know what time they're coming home, how they're going to do this, and who they're with, et cetera, et cetera.
I feel like that was my childhood. I mean, my father was a very controlling, very hard rules. And it's so interesting because the more I rebelled, the more he got mad. And then I feel like, we were talking about this earlier, I had an insight just from this. I've been studying this for years, and I just had another insight of, he hated that I stood up for myself. And then I realized that I was playing out his shadow because he would never do that at work. He would always just kind of go with the flow. He was very, at work, he was very kind of non-confrontational, non-conflict. And so I was the one going, hey. And so it probably triggered him even more and made him more controlling. So yeah, but that's, it's so interesting how you examine this and you're like, oh, that's why that triggered them so much. You think it's about respect and all these parent, you should respect your parents and not talk back, but it's more a deeper problem than that. It's more the child is expressing that rebellion, or this is wrong, or this doesn't feel right. And where is that parent not expressing that in their life?
Yeah. And so when the over control takes over, the child then pushes back, right? And they act out even more. And so it becomes a power struggle and all those difficult situations. So these conflicts then, they not only remain within the family unit, they're passed on because now the child is carrying that shadow, or the opposite of the parent shadow now, in reverse. Now they become the rebellious one, the creative one, the one that acts out, and they have to repress, like you say, their kindness, their gentleness, their their
empathy.
Ability to really connect to other people
in a more vulnerable way.
In a more
Well,
vulnerable
another
way.
thing too about this is we often see this as a pattern. People we work with is that the parent the kid wanted to do something creative, like be an artist or a musician or something, go to acting school, and the parent's like, no, you're going to be a partner in my law firm, or you're going to take on the family business, and then if sibling goes along with it, then they actually suppress that creativity in their shadow, that living your passion, and they learn that the only way you can survive is to do something that you don't love. And so when we hit midlife, we see a lot of our coaches come to us for the training, and they've lived the life that the parent wanted them to, or what they implied that the way you should live your life is get a good job, make good money, be consistent, take care of your finances, don't go travel the world and do crazy things. And that midlife, they want to break free. They want to do something more fulfilling and passionate. And so that's another way. Either you rebel against your parents or you conform, and then you basically take on your parents' shadow, and it goes generation. And especially, I would say people that have family businesses, I'm sure generation after generation, everyone's suppressing what they really want to do, because the whole idea is you keep it in the family, and you're just going to, follow and take over the family business one day and not do what you love to do.
Yeah, and there's a natural tendency for children to rebel at a certain stage of their lives, to really break free and become independent from the parents. But here we're talking a little bit more nuance in relationship to the shadow, right? That we're looking at, okay, what's going on? And instead of simply saying, well, it's a natural process, the children are ready to break free from the parents. We're looking at this situation more psychologically and taking into account the shadow, the unconscious, the psychodynamic properties of the mind.
So it's almost like we talked about before, the modeling that the parent does. So it doesn't even have to be like, you can't be a musician. The modeling is, you watch your parents and you could just assume that's just the way the world is, and they seem to be safe, and they have a house over their, roof over their head, that this must be the way to go.
Yeah. And so how do we work with these families in coaching, in Jungian coaching? It would be bring this to consciousness. In other words, bring the shadow to awareness, because that resolves a lot of the conflict. The parent understands, oh, I see, I'm projecting my own repressed wishes onto my child, and I can withdraw them.
So would you say that this is a shadow work would be a great way for parents to deal with kids with behavior issues, and they're not studying, or they're, acting out at school, or being bullies, or being bullied, like those type of problems they have with kids that aren't studying, they're not, goofing off and not studying and getting in trouble in school. It would be the shadow work. Instead of just changing behavior, it would be, let's look at what the parent is projecting. Even the teacher, we can go into that too, what the teacher's projecting onto that child as well.
Yeah, because then it becomes these conflicts, so-called conflicts, become opportunities for everyone to grow psychologically, emotionally, and learn new skills in relationships.
So let's move on to my favorite topic, marriage. And this could be romantic partnerships, people who are in long-term relationships, or even, just generally with dating. When I used to be a love coach, I used to say you put your profile up there thinking you're going to attract your soulmate, but you end up attracting your shadow. And it's really quite true.
Oh, yeah. You end up attracting your shadow. That's a beautiful equation. Yeah, how it works is essentially that you often look for a partner that's going to fulfill your unmet needs in yourself. In other words, there's something that's off balance, and what's off balance in you is essentially that you're over-identifying as the persona, and then you're missing out on all the repressed content of the shadow that's in the shadow, right, that you pushed away.
You like give your partner that burden to carry that part of yourself.
Yes, and then when you get into a relationship, as you're looking for a partner, you choose people that match that shadow, and in essence, you're looking to compensate externally for what you feel you're lacking.
So, for example, if you're a very pleasing, passive person, like a lot of us had mothers that were like that, and then the father was this like strong man, and so the woman would project her strength onto the husband. Yeah. And then the husband would say, you're going to carry out the sensitive, emotional side of me, right? That I don't accept.
Yeah.
That is a very simple example, or it could be vice versa, where the mother's the strong, professional woman, and the husband, stays at home, or the partner, and whatever sex they are, stays at home and becomes more the passive person. And then it kind of plays that way. Like one person is kind of the calm, sensitive one, and the other one's the strong, powerful one, and they kind of carry each other's shadows with them. But they think that other person, they get strength from that other person.
Yeah. That's exactly. So, like you mentioned, right? This is a burden that your partner then has to carry, and intuitively, even if they're not conscious of it, they feel that this is unfair, right? You're projecting too much. You're expecting too much from me. It's not my job to make you happy, to fulfill your emotional needs, all that stuff. And so they rebel or, push back, and that's where conflict begins. Dissatisfaction with a relationship, they fall out of love, et cetera, et cetera.
And it's a conflict because you see couples, they stay together even though they're fighting a lot and arguing, or they're tempted to leave, but there's something that keeps them together because that other person is carrying their shadow. And so it's almost like they'll lose half of themselves. And when we have relationships that break up, we do feel like we lost a part of ourselves because that mirror isn't there for us to carry.
Yeah. And that's where the kind of the power struggles begin, the passive aggressive behavior, the emotional distance.
Yeah.
Right? They feel that there's no more connection here.
One of the, a friend of mine, we were talking about shadow work a couple of years ago, and she was like, what is shadow work? And we got to the point where she was the one who had to be the responsible one all the time, and everyone else got to do whatever they wanted. And there's always that one person in the relationship that is the responsible one, that makes sure the bills are paid, that, shows up for work, always has a steady job, keeps the house together, keeps the family together. And then the other person's sort of like in and out. And it is that, well, the fear that if I let that go, if I can't just relax. And so there's a comfort we have in pushing away that shadow, but it's showing up for us. They're these other people they're irritating us because it's a part of us that needs to relax and let go of so much control and not be so responsible all the time for everything. And we give people a lot of freedom. It's like, it seems very illogical to think like, well, isn't responsibility good? But that's what shadow work does. It questions, it takes everything from black and white and puts it in a gray area where you can sort of see that it's not 100% good or bad.
Yeah.
So the last one, or do you have something else about
No,
mine?
no. The last one is sibling rivalry. Adler, who worked with Freud originally as well as Jung, he came up with this idea that the birth order has something to say about how you're going to develop your personality. So he thought the firstborn, of course, has to bear a lot of the projection of the parents, right? That you're going to be the golden kid, you're going to be very successful and responsible and carry on the family tradition and all that.
Well, even like in some very conservative families, it's the firstborn son. So they might not be the firstborn, but the firstborn son carries that in a very conservative or old-fashioned, traditional kind of thinking families.
The second one then dethrones them, or at least from the perspective of the firstborn, right? When the second child is born, they feel jealousy, resentment because, hey, I was the center of attention. Now this new kid on the block is taking all the attention from me, and so they resent the second one, and then the sibling rivalry begins, right? That the second born then feels like I have to outshine the first one, or at least do as good as them. And then the second one is kind of thinking, who is this new kid, and how can I spoil their plans?
So you and I are both second born, which is interesting. So we understand each other.
That's right.
We have that compassion for the second child.
Yeah, of course. This doesn't mean we don't love each other. I love my big brother. But,
I love my big brother.
But yeah, I remember as kids, there was always this rivalry going on.
And especially because you were both men. So my brother and me, I was the first girl. So it wasn't as competitive because I didn't have to compete to be a man. Well, although I did feel like men were favored in my family. But so when but I thought that the sibling order, birth order, was sort of debunked in some way, or it's like some people debunk it.
Yeah, it's hard to research those kind of things. I mean,
But from a logical, you could see where that shows up. And then again, it's not hard and fast and true with every situation. Again, like the sex could matter. Depending on the culture.
That's right.
Some cultures, like the men are honored and the women are just extras.
That's right. And then the last child, of course, he said, gets a lot of attention, right? Because they're the baby, the baby.
Even from the older siblings, they're like taking care of them.
Yeah, and so they get used to that. I get a lot of attention. I want to continue to get that attention. So they become attention seekers, and often they go into show business, and because of that need that they have.
Well, I think I like attention, and I was the first girl, so
everybody loves attention. That's like catnip for us. Right? It's what we live for.
So yeah, that's interesting. And so then with the siblings, I mean, what is the root of the rivalry? I guess it's like an ancient survival drive, because if you weren't favored by the parent, they like from animals, the parent wouldn't feed you. Or if you're a weakling in some animal structures, they push away the one that is weak, and don't feed it because they just figured it's better off to thin the herd in a way. And so what's driving human beings is that need to be validated and loved by the parent in order to feel love and acceptance and safety.
Yeah, that's it.
And then, so the sibling is competing with that. Yes. And so it's demonstrated symbolically early in life, as far as like, I remember when we were kids, we each had our soda glasses and we all had to measure up to make sure we all got the same amount to be equal. I'm sure everyone can relate to that. And you're not allowed to have more than the other, or this one got 2 cookies, I have to have 2 cookies, and that kind of needing to be fair and equitable.
Yeah. So the shadow then plays out when the feelings of inferiority, which have been pushed into the shadow, right? Because we all want to grow and present ourselves as strong and capable. But when the feelings of inferiority are projected onto the other sibling or siblings, then we have that tension, that conflict.
So could you give an example of feelings of inferiority projected on the sibling? So they're looking at the sibling being inferior? or no?
No, well, it would be like this, that let's say the oldest son looks at the second sibling, and the second sibling is doing better in school, right? They're doing better in school. Now those feelings of inferiority are coming up in him, and he's projecting them onto the second brother.
And so that he would put down the second brother or make fun of him and make him feel inferior because he needs to kind of get rid of that inferiority feeling.
Right. Yeah. He needs to prop himself up somehow and regain his status, his power.
Wow. And so that's jealousy too. What about the adoration of a sibling? Because I know there's that too, where you look up and everyone wants to be that golden boy, live up to that and get that attention from the parent. How does that play out? So then the child becomes the persona of inferiority, or they take on the perception of they're not wanted or they're not important, and they project their own sense of confidence and power onto that sibling because they're getting all the attention.
Yeah, that would be the way it works, right? Because we not only put in our shadow the negative things, like you said, but also the positive. So that if we project this kind of power onto our siblings, then it means that power is in our shadow.
Yeah, we have to repress power, and then we have this persona of no one listens to me, no one pays attention to me, I'm not important. How many people have had, those of you who are coaches and therapists and worked with people with that narrative, and it's because their power is suppressed in the shadow, which I think that's one of the most important things of the way we approach the shadow is it's a positive psychology. It really is about helping people take the whatever content that's been repressed and bring it to consciousness, not to heal it, but to allow the client to be fully expressed and really have a choice in their life. So in the beginning of life, we're conditioned and we act out of this persona by default. It's our default personality. It's not our true personality. And Jung called this the true personality, or the mana personality, is when we start integrating the shadow and other aspects of our unconscious selves, we start to become more whole or feel more whole. We're not operating just half energy. We're really reclaiming all this energy and reserve and power that we've been suppressing. And I think most of us, we don't exert all our power, even if we're super confident. Don't you think that most people who haven't done individuation are just operating from that ego confidence, which isn't really truly a deep power? It's more of I have to project confidence, but I really don't feel it inside.
Yeah, because that's the persona. At the persona level, we can appear really confident. I mean, really super confident. But in the unconscious, it's the opposite, right? We're repressing inferiority, our fear of losing control, our fear of ridicule, and all those things.
So we're either accepting inferiority as our identity or repressing inferiority and having an identity of maybe a bully or a forceful person who always needs to feel in control, and not, it's like being inferior would be very dangerous almost, something terrible. And so let's just, before we go, just talk a little bit about what integration means. How would someone do that and why it's important? And I love, when I first started working with you and we started talking about Jung, the simplest explanation for integration is really having a choice. It's not saying that you have to now be inferior if you're a bully, or you have to be super powerful or super aggressive. I call that persona swapping. It's really about, you see both sides of the coin. You see your persona, you see your shadow, and then there's this happy middle, almost like a gray area where you get to choose, you know what, in this situation, I choose to be more direct. In this situation, I choose to be more kind, but it's at a free choice versus a compulsion out of defensiveness or fear.
Yeah, that's certainly the beginning of that. But also what happens is that you're able to reclaim the projection, retrieve it. Yes. So that you're not blaming others. You're able to see others as they're doing what they need to do to survive, just like I did, right? To create the personas that they believe will help them, and to hide whatever they feel they can't show to the world. So you give them a break, right? You're not kind of critical or judgmental about others.
And I think what's important about this whole topic about family and shadow is this is where it all begins. This is where our personality is born. Our issues are born, and you don't need to have like a traumatic event in your life to have a shadow. It's just normal. Everyone has one. Everyone has a persona. It's the way our psyche needed to develop. It's a natural part of our development. But looking at these three type of relationships, we get a deeper sense of who we are and how we became who we are from a persona standpoint. And especially when you become a parent and you look at a child, you're dealing with your child, you start to see like your own shadow with your parent and you be the child and the siblings. And so again, Thanksgiving, holidays, go and spend time with your family, and you'll start to see your psyche, like if you imagine every person around that table represents a part of yourself, you start to see, wow, there's a lot of me that I haven't expressed yet or forgiven yet about myself or judge about myself. And so it's about dropping the judgment. It's about making a choice and retrieving the projection. And so when we look at this next week, when we talk about work relationships, whether you run a company or you're in a company as a team member, working with clients, customers, all these dynamics will come into play as well. It's like your family is the core, and then it spreads out into the culture.
Yeah, and often these conflicts, of course, are carried on into adulthood and into the work setting if the individual doesn't do inner work, shadow work.
So we'll continue this conversation next week. It's going to be juicy, another juicy one. So before we go, I do want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast here at either on iTunes or Spotify, any of the podcast services. We'd love to see you here every week and learn a little bit more about yourself and hopefully inspire you to take your individuation journey to the next level.
We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.